844 people died on a ship that never left the dock. Most of them drowned in 20 feet of water, 20 feet from shore. The river was calm. The lines were still tied. It was 7:28 in the morning, July 24th, 1915, on the Chicago River. This is the Eastland disaster, the largest single loss of life from a shipwreck on the Great Lakes, and the only one in which the ship rolled over while it was still moored. Over the next 12 minutes, we're going to look at 3 questions. What made a passenger steamer roll onto her side in calm water, in plain view of a downtown crowd? Did the post-Titanic safety law, signed only 4 months earlier, actually contribute to the deaths it was written to prevent? And why, with 844 people drowned and 12 years of warning signs on file, did nobody go to prison for it? The Eastland was launched in May 1903 from the Jenks Shipbuilding Company yard at Port Huron, Michigan. She was named through a public contest after 565 proposals were submitted. She was built fast, 22 miles an hour, and built light, designed to carry 500 passengers and refrigerated fruit between South Haven and Chicago. She was unstable from her first season. By September of 1903, her builders had returned her to Port Huron for modifications. They added an air conditioning system. They added an induced draft boiler system. They repositioned the machinery to reduce her hull draft so she could load in shallower water. According to the Wikipedia entry that aggregates the original engineering reports, the combination of reduced draft and added topside weight cut her metacentric height, the measure of how strongly a ship returns upright when it tilts. From that month forward, Eastland was a borderline stable vessel. The record after that is a list of warnings. On the 17th of July, 1904, she nearly capsized, leaving South Haven with about 3,000 passengers. Her capacity was reduced to 2,800. Cabins were stripped out, lifeboats added, the hull repaired. On the 5th of August, 1906, she listed again. Complaints were filed against the operating line. Now under new ownership, she moved from Lake Michigan to Lake Erie, and her remaining 39 cabins were removed in an attempt to lower her center of gravity. It did not hold. On the 1st of July, 1912, while loading passengers at Cleveland, the Eastland listed about 25 degrees. A ship listing 25 degrees at her dock is a ship telling her owners she is wrong. The owners adjusted operating practice and kept her sailing. In June 1914, she changed hands again, bought by the St. Joseph, Chicago Steamship Company. Captain Harry Peterson was appointed her master, and then her new owners did the thing that, in hindsight, looks the most reckless of all. They poured concrete into her. The hardwood flooring of the forward dining room on the cabin level was torn out and replaced with 2 inches of poured concrete. A second concrete layer was added near the aft gangway. Together, this added between 15 and 20 tons of weight, and all of it sat above her waterline. On a ship that had been listing under warning signs for 11 years, the owners had just added another 15 tons of topside load. By the spring of 1915, Eastland had been listing under warning signs for 12 years. Then Washington added one more load. The law was the Seamen's Act of 1915. It had been championed by Senator Robert La Follette of Wisconsin, drafted in direct response to the loss of the Titanic 3 years earlier, and signed by President Woodrow Wilson on the 4th of March, 1915. It required the retrofitting of complete lifeboat sets onto American passenger vessels, the basic post-Titanic reform. For most ships, this was straightforward. For the Eastland, it was the opposite. Her owners now faced a choice: reduce her certified passenger capacity to compensate for the added weight of the new lifeboats, or add the boats and keep the capacity. They chose the second option, qualifying her for a license to carry 2,570 passengers. A vessel already so top-heavy, she carried special restrictions, now loaded with even more weight overhead. To understand what happened next, you have to picture the dock. The morning of Saturday, the 24th of July, 1915, was cool and damp. 5 steamers had been chartered: Eastland, Theodore Roosevelt, Petoskey, Racine, and Rochester, to take employees of Western Electric's Hawthorne Works in Cicero to a company picnic at Michigan City, Indiana. Most of the workers and their families were immigrants, predominantly Czech, Polish, German, Norwegian, and Hungarian. Boarding began at about 6:30 a.m. on the south bank of the Chicago River, between Clark and LaSalle Streets. By about 7 o'clock, Bicknell's contemporaneous figure, later reconciled accounts, gives 7:10. The Eastland had reached her capacity of 2,572 passengers. United States government inspectors ordered the gangplank pulled. The Red Cross account, written 6 weeks later by Ernest P. Bicknell, describes what happened next in plain language. At about 7 o'clock, the steamer was noticed to be listing slightly toward the dock. Bicknell's account. Some later analyses suggest the initial list may have been to port, away from the wharf. Her ballast compartments had been emptied for boarding. The keel lacked the weight that should have been counterbalancing the passengers crowded onto her open upper decks. The crew tried to fix it. Engineers began admitting water into her ballast tanks. The list reversed. Slowly at first, then less slowly, the Eastland began rolling away from the dock, out into the river. A tug had already attached a hawser and was preparing to tow her into the stream. As she leaned, water poured in through her lowest portholes and through the open lower deck gangway. This is where the morning becomes a disaster. Many passengers had moved below decks to warm themselves on the cool, damp morning. As the ship rolled, those on the upper decks slid toward the low side rail. The combined weight of the passengers and the inflowing water finished what the cargo had begun. At 7:28 a.m., the Eastland lurched sharply to port and rolled completely onto her port side. She came to rest on the river bottom, 20 feet below the surface. Barely half of her hull was submerged. She was 20 feet from the wharf. The passengers thrown into the river were mostly saved. Captain John O'Mara of the nearby Kenosha pulled alongside the exposed hull so survivors could leap to safety. Peter Boyle, a deckhand from the Petoskey, drowned trying to rescue passengers. Helen Repa, a Western Electric nurse, took command of much of the onshore relief operation. City firemen swarmed onto the hull and began cutting holes through the steel from above to reach the people trapped inside. The ones below decks were the ones who died. They were trapped by the water, by the sudden rollover, and in some cases by the heavy furniture that had slid across the cabins, pianos, bookcases, dining tables. She had rolled in less than half an hour. The question the next day was not what had happened. It was who had led it. The bodies were taken first to the Reed, Murdoch and Company wholesale building on the north bank of the river. By that afternoon, the unidentified dead were consolidated at the 2nd Regiment Armory. The contemporaneous Red Cross account by Bicknell, written within weeks of the disaster, gave the toll as over 900 drowned. The modern reconciled figure, drawn from later identification work, is 844, 841 passengers and 2 crew. 220 of the dead were Czech immigrants from the Cicero neighborhood, the heart of the Hawthorne Works community. Western Electric appropriated $100,000, roughly $3.18 million in today's dollars, for the families of its dead employees. The mayor's committee, working with the Chicago Red Cross chapter, raised more than $350,000 within 2 weeks. From this point, the story belongs to the inquiry. A grand jury indicted the president and 3 other officers of the steamship company for manslaughter. The captain and the chief engineer were indicted for criminal carelessness. The grand jury's stated cause was clear. The disaster was the result of conditions of instability caused by overloading of passengers, mishandling of water ballast, and the ship's faulty construction. The defense was led by Clarence Darrow. At the extradition hearing, Darrow questioned the principal witness, Sidney Jenks, the president of the company that had built the Eastland 12 years earlier. Jenks testified that the ship's first owners had wanted a fast fruit carrier capable of 20 miles an hour and a capacity of 500 passengers. Darrow asked whether Jenks had ever concerned himself with the conversion of the ship into a passenger steamer carrying 2,500 or more. Jenks answered, "I had no way of knowing the quantity of its business after it left our yards. No, I did not worry about the Eastland. He testified that no stability test of the ship had ever been performed. The court refused extradition. According to the Wikipedia summary of the judgment, the evidence amounted to barely a scintilla of proof. The 4 company officers were not aboard the ship. Every act charged against the captain and the engineer had been performed in the ordinary course of business, and the Eastland had operated for years and carried thousands safely. The accused, the court reasoned, had been justified in believing the ship to be seaworthy. Nobody was convicted. Carl Sandburg, then better known as a journalist than as a poet, wrote an angry account for the International Socialist Review accusing regulators of having ignored known safety issues. He also wrote a poem called The Eastland. According to Wikipedia, the poem was considered too harsh for publication when it was written and was not printed until 1993, nearly 80 years later. The men who built her, owned her, and loaded her all walked free. What did not walk free was the ship itself. The Eastland was raised from the riverbed on the 14th of August, 1915, 3 weeks after she rolled. She was sold at auction to the Illinois Naval Reserve. She was converted into a gunboat. On the 20th of September, 1918, she was recommissioned as the USS Wilmette. For the next 25 years, she trained naval reservists on the Great Lakes. In 1921, she was used to sink a surrendered German U-boat in target practice. In August 1943, she carried President Franklin D. Roosevelt on a 10-day fishing trip on Lake Superior. She was scrapped in 1947. The ship that had killed 844 people in 20 feet of water was given a second life as a Navy training vessel and an American footnote. The people she killed were not. According to the Eastland Disaster Historical Society, which maintains the descendant records and the memorial at Bohemia National Cemetery, 22 entire families were lost in the rollover. Every member of those households gone in a single half hour on a Saturday morning. The last known survivor, Marion Eichholz, was 3 years old when the ship rolled. She died in 2014 at the age of 102. The memorial, a large ship's wheel dedicated on the 12th of July, 2015, on the centenary, sits at Bohemia National Cemetery in Chicago, where many of the Czech Cicero dead are buried. What survived in the record is not a mystery of cause. The engineering is clear. The Eastland was a borderline stable ship from her second season. 12 years of listing incidents, 2 near capsizes, 15 tons of poured concrete in 1914, and a final load of post-Titanic lifeboats in the spring of 1915 pushed her past the edge. The ballast on the morning of the 24th did the rest. What did not survive is an answer to the other question. Not who pulled the lever, not who loaded the boats. The Eastland had been warning her owners for 12 years, in writing, in inspection reports, in 2 prior near capsizes, and a 25-degree list at Cleveland. That record was on file. It was on file in the spring of 1915, when her owners chose to add the new lifeboats and keep the passenger numbers. It was on file at 6:30 that Saturday morning, when 2,572 people walked up her gangplank. The Eastland's lesson was on file. The dead were underneath it.